The blindfold smelled like gasoline and old sweat. When they finally ripped it off, the first thing I saw was a concrete ceiling stained with water damage, and the first thing I felt was the zip tie cutting into my wrists behind my back. My boyfriend Dominic was standing near the door, counting stacks of bills from a silver briefcase like he was sorting laundry. He didn't look at me. Not once. 3 days earlier, he'd kissed my forehead at Pearson International and whispered that Prague was going to change our lives. He was right about that part. The man they called Mr. Volkov sat across from me on a metal folding chair, legs crossed, watching me the way a jeweler examines a stone before deciding whether to cut it. He was tall, mid-50s, gray at the temples, wearing a black overcoat that probably cost more than my rent. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless and completely empty. Dominic snapped the briefcase shut and tucked it under his arm. He turned to Volkov with that smile I used to find charming, the one where his dimple shows. 500,000 Canadian, all there. You can count it again if you want. She's healthy, no family looking for her, no complications. He said it the way you'd describe a used car. My throat was so dry I could barely swallow. I wanted to scream, but the duct tape across my mouth wouldn't let me. So I just stared at Dominic, willing him to look at me. He didn't. He reached for the door handle and mumbled, "Pleasure doing business." 4 days ago, I was a 27-year-old physiotherapist working at a clinic in Mississauga. I had a one-bedroom apartment near Square One, a cat named Biscuit, and a boyfriend who told me he'd landed a massive consulting contract overseas. They're flying us business class, babe. Prague, Vienna, maybe Budapest. 2 weeks of us, no phones, no work, just us. His voice had that warm certainty that always made me stop questioning things. I should have questioned everything. The clinic had been slow, and my lease was month to month, and Dominic had this way of making the future sound like a movie you were already watching. I told my boss I needed 2 weeks off. I told my best friend Zara to water my plants. I handed Dominic my passport at the airport because he said he was handling all the documents. And when we landed in Prague and he drove me to a villa 40 minutes outside the city, I didn't think anything was wrong until the iron door closed and I heard the deadbolt slide. That sound, I'll hear it until the day I die. Now Volkov was circling me slowly. His shoes made no sound on the concrete. I could smell his cologne, something sharp and expensive, cutting through the damp air. He stopped in front of me and lifted my chin with a gloved hand, tilting my face left, then right, like he was inspecting fruit at a market. I closed my eyes. Tears rolled down my cheeks and soaked into the tape. Then his hand froze. I opened my eyes. He wasn't looking at my face anymore. His gaze had dropped to my collarbone, to the thin gold chain around my neck. Specifically, to the pendant hanging from it, a small gold locket shaped like a maple leaf with a ruby set into the center. I'd worn it every single day since I was 6 years old. My mother had clasped it around my neck herself, knelt down to my height, and said, "This was your grandmother's and her grandmother's before that. You never take it off, Harper. Never. Promise me." I promised. I kept that promise even when Dominic told me it looked tacky with certain outfits. Volkov's face changed. The emptiness in his eyes cracked open, and something else came flooding in. Shock. Disbelief. And then something that looked almost like fear. His hand was trembling. He reached toward the pendant but stopped, fingers hovering a centimeter away like it would burn him. "Where did you get this?" His voice was different now. The cold authority was gone, replaced by something raw and urgent. I couldn't answer. "The tape." He spun around. "Get that off her mouth, now." One of his men stepped forward and tore the tape away. The pain was sharp, like a layer of skin coming with it, but I barely registered it. Everything in me was focused on this man and the way he was looking at my necklace like it was a holy relic. "I'm asking you again, where did you get this pendant?" "My mother gave it to me," I said. My voice came out cracked and thin. Volkov's body went rigid. His breathing changed, got faster, shallower. "Your mother. What is her name?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to give this man information. but something about his reaction, the way his composure had shattered the moment he saw the locket, made me answer honestly. Vivian. Vivian Blackwell. The color drained from his face. He staggered back like I'd struck him. One of his men moved to catch him, but Volkov waved him off. He pressed a hand to the wall to steady himself, and for a long moment, the only sound in that basement was his ragged breathing. Then he straightened up, turned to face me, and his entire demeanor transformed. The predator was gone. In his place was a man who looked like he'd just realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff. Dominic, who had paused at the door to watch this unfold, stepped forward with his salesman grin. Hey, if you like the necklace, keep it. Consider it a bonus. She's all yours. Do whatever. Volkov moved so fast I almost missed it. He crossed the room in 2 strides and backhanded Dominic across the face with a crack that echoed off the concrete walls. Dominic hit the floor, the briefcase flying from his hands, bills scattering like confetti. Blood ran from his split lip as he looked up in pure bewilderment. Do you have any idea? Volkov said, his voice low and shaking with fury. What you've done? Do you understand who this woman is? Dominic sputtered. She's nobody. She's a physio from Mississauga. She doesn't even have a savings account. Shut your mouth. Volkov didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He turned back to me, and then he did something that made every person in that room go still. He bowed. Deep, formal, almost reverent. Ms. Blackwell, my name is Sergei Volkov. I am at your service. I failed to recognize you, and for that failure, I will spend the rest of my life making amends. I stared at him. What are you talking about? He straightened and immediately turned to his men. Cutter restraints, spring water, a blanket, and get this piece of garbage out of my sight. He gestured at Dominic without looking at him. One of the men cut my zip ties. I rubbed my wrists, my mind spinning. 20 seconds ago, I was merchandise. Now the man who was supposed to buy me was treating me like royalty. You know my mother, I said. It wasn't a question. Volkov lowered his eyes. Know her. Madame Blackwell saved my life. She pulled me out of nothing and gave me everything I have. Without her, I would be dead in a ditch outside Odessa. This pendant, this locket, it is the sigil of her direct bloodline. I have seen it only once before, around her own neck, seeing it on you. He trailed off, visibly shaken. This made no sense. My mother was a real estate agent in Burlington. She drove a Honda CR-V. She yelled at me about RSP contributions and made butter tarts from scratch every Thanksgiving. She was strict, often cold, and we hadn't had a real conversation in months because I chose Dominic over her advice. How could she be anyone's madam? Volkov escorted me out of that basement and into a waiting SUV. As we drove through the Czech countryside, I sat in the back seat wrapped in a wool blanket, watching farmland slide past, trying to make my brain process what had just happened. My boyfriend of 2 years had sold me. The man who bought me turned out to worship my mother, and my mother, apparently, was not who I thought she was. Mr. Volkov, I need to know what's going on. He looked at me through the rearview mirror. It is not my place to reveal Madame's affairs, but I can tell you this. The business your mother built is larger than you can imagine. This locket is the proof of her bloodline, the one symbol that commands absolute loyalty from every person in her network. Seeing it is the same as seeing her in person. What kind of business? He paused. An empire. We arrived at a walled estate outside Prague. Iron gates, security in black suits, cameras everywhere. It looked like a diplomatic compound. Inside, the main house was enormous, stone and dark wood, fireplaces in every room. Volkov led me to a guest suite with a view of the gardens and said my mother had been contacted and was on her way. I stood at the window for a long time. The sunset turned the gardens gold and then blue. I touched the locket at my throat. Warm as always, like it held its own heartbeat. I thought about my childhood. We were comfortable, never rich, but I went to private school in Oakville. I thought it was scholarships. When a bully harassed me in grade 10, she was expelled the next week. When my car got broken into at McMaster's, the police called 2 hours later saying they'd found the guy. I thought I was lucky. Now I wasn't so sure. I thought about my father. He left when I was 4. My mother never spoke about him. I'd stopped asking by the time I was 12. She raised me alone, with this tightness in her jaw that never relaxed, this watchfulness in her eyes that I mistook for coldness. And I thought about Dominic, how easily I'd fallen for him. His smile, his confidence, the way he made me feel chosen. He'd shown up at the clinic with a sports injury 18 months ago, and within a week, he was texting me constantly, taking me to restaurants I couldn't afford, telling me I was too good for my little life. I believed him. I believed everything. The next morning, Volkov came to my room with a tablet. "We've completed our investigation of Dominic Mercer." He handed it to me. I read the file. Dominic wasn't a management consultant. He didn't have an MBA from Western. His real name was Dominic Karev, and he was connected to an international trafficking ring that specialized in what they called clean targets, women with no close family ties, no one who'd raise an alarm quickly. He'd targeted me specifically because I was isolated. My mother and I were barely speaking. Zara was the only person who'd notice I was gone, and even she thought I was on vacation. But here was the part that made my stomach drop. Behind Dominic was a name, the Ashcroft Group. And behind the Ashcroft Group was a man named Brennan Ashcroft, the head of a rival conglomerate that had been trying to dismantle my mother's empire for over a decade. Dominic wasn't just a con man, he was a weapon, aimed directly at Vivian Blackwell, through me. "Where is Dominic now?" I asked. Volkov's expression didn't change. "As you wished. You said you didn't want to see him again. He's been dealt with. He will never appear in your life again, or anyone else's." A chill ran through me. I understood what he meant, and I didn't ask for clarification. That afternoon, I heard a helicopter. I walked to the window and watched a black chopper descend onto the lawn. The door opened, and a woman in a charcoal trench coat stepped out. She was flanked by men in dark suits. Even from a distance, I recognized her walk, that straight-backed, purposeful stride that used to embarrass me when she'd pick me up from school. My mother. But not the mother I knew. This version of her carried an authority that distorted the air around her like heat off asphalt. Volkov, who commanded fear in every room he entered, practically folded in half when she approached. She gave him one look, one single glance, and he went white. "Dereliction of duty," she said. 2 words. That was enough. She found me in the study. She sat behind the desk, crossed her hands, and looked at me with those dark eyes that had always made me feel like I was being measured and found slightly lacking. "Sit down, Harper." I sat. "Volkov told me everything. You handled yourself better than I expected. You didn't fall apart. I want an explanation," I said. My voice didn't shake, and I was proud of that. She studied me for a long time. Then she started talking, and the world I knew dissolved. My mother, Vivian Blackwell, was not a real estate agent. Or rather, she was, the same way the ocean is technically water. Blackwell Holdings was a multinational conglomerate that operated across 4 continents, mining in northern Ontario and the Territories, shipping through the port of Vancouver and Halifax, finance in Toronto, London, and Singapore. Some of it legal, some of it in those gray spaces where laws get flexible if you have enough lawyers. She'd built it from nothing over 30 years, and she'd hidden it from me completely. "I wanted you to have a normal life," she said, her voice flat. "No targets on your back, no one using you to get to me. I kept you at arm's length because closeness would have put you in danger." "It didn't work," I said. "I got sold to a trafficker in a Prague basement." Something flickered in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or anger. "I know. And that's why we need to discuss what happens next." She poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a decanter on the desk and slid one toward me. "I can send you to New Zealand. New name, new identity, enough money to live 10 lifetimes. You disappear, you're safe, and you never hear from me again." "No." She raised an eyebrow. It was the most emotion I'd seen from her in years. "No. I'm done being protected. I'm done being kept in the dark. That's how Dominic got to me in the first place, because I didn't know anything. I didn't know who I was, who you were, what was real." I leaned forward. I want to stay. I want to learn everything, and I want to make the Ashcrofts pay. My mother looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something like respect in her eyes. You're sure? This world doesn't have a pause button. Once you're in, there's no going back to Mississauga, no going back to your clinic, no going back to being Harper, the nice girl who rescues people's torn ACLs. I'm sure, she nodded once. Then your education starts tomorrow, and it did. 6 in the morning, 2 hours of combat training with a former JTF2 operator who treated me like a recruit on the worst day of basic. Every muscle in my body screamed for the first week. Then, business classes, 4 hours a day, the entire history and structure of Blackwell Holdings, laid out by analysts, lawyers, and consultants. Afternoons were marksmanship, evasive driving, intelligence analysis. Evenings, my mother tested me personally, grilling me on everything I'd learned, poking holes in my reasoning, never satisfied but never giving up on me either. I was drowning, and I was more alive than I'd ever been. 2 weeks into my training, my mother called me to the study. Her face was different, harder than usual, which was saying something. There's something else you need to know. She pressed a button on the desk and the door opened. A woman walked in, mid-60s, silver hair pulled back in a bun, wearing a neat gray cardigan. My heart jumped. Greta? Greta Lindquist had been our housekeeper since I was a baby. She lived in the apartment above our garage in Burlington. She made me packed lunches all through elementary school. She braided my hair. She was the one who held me when my mother was too busy or too distant. I loved her more than almost anyone. Oh, Harper's sweetheart, Greta said, her eyes filling with tears. I'm so glad you're safe. I started to move toward her, but my mother's voice stopped me cold. Greta, tell my daughter how Dominic Mercer got past every security protocol I put in place. The room went silent. Greta's face went white. The tears stopped. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Tell her, my mother continued, her tone like a blade, how the Ashcrofts knew Harper's schedule, her habits, her route to work, the fact that she and I weren't speaking. Tell her how they knew the exact moment to send Dominic in. Greta's legs buckled. She dropped to her knees on the hardwood floor, her hands clutching her cardigan, her face crumpling. I'm sorry, she whispered. They took my grandson. He's 9 years old. They said they'd hurt him if I didn't cooperate. They said they wouldn't actually harm Harper. They just needed her out of the country for a few weeks to pressure you into a business concession. I couldn't breathe. This woman who had sung me to sleep, who had put bandages on my scraped knees, who had driven me to my prom, she was the one who opened the door and let the wolves in. They lied to you, my mother said, and her voice held no sympathy. The Ashcrofts would have disposed of Harper the moment they got what they wanted, and they would have killed your grandson to eliminate the witness. You traded my daughter's life for a lie. Greta sobbed. She looked at me with those watery blue eyes that used to make me feel so safe. Harper, please, you have to understand. He's all I have. I stood there and something inside me hardened into stone. I loved this woman. Part of me still did. But she had weighed my life against her grandson's and decided I was expendable. Get her out, I said quietly. My mother nodded at the guards. As they lifted Greta to her feet, my mother added, find the grandson. Get him away from the Ashcrofts. Send them both somewhere safe, somewhere far. They don't come back. Ever. Even now, in the middle of everything, she had principles. Ruthless, but principled. I was beginning to understand why people followed her. After Greta was gone, my mother poured me another drink. Brennan Ashcroft has been my enemy for 15 years, she said. His father's company collapsed when I acquired their mining rights in Sudbury. The father took his own life, Brennan blames me. He's spent every year since building up enough power to destroy me, and he chose you as his weapon because he knew you were the only thing I'd unravel for. My father, I said suddenly. Where does he fit into this? She was quiet for a long time. Then, your father was a good man who couldn't live in my world. I sent him away to protect him, the same way I tried to protect you. He's alive, he's safe, he's in British Columbia. and he knows nothing about any of this. It was the first time she'd spoken about him in over 20 years. I filed it away, one crisis at a time. 3 days later, Volkov knocked on my door at midnight. There's been movement. The Ashcrofts know Greta has been removed. They know you're alive and with your mother. Our intelligence suggests they're planning something significant. Then my phone rang. A Toronto number I didn't recognize. Harper? The voice on the other end was shaking, barely recognizable through the sobs, but I knew it instantly. Zara? Harper, please help me. These men came to my apartment. They said they're from something called the Ashcroft Group. They said if you don't come to a warehouse on Cherry Street alone by midnight Toronto time, they'll... She couldn't finish. I heard a man's voice bark something in the background, and the line went dead. Zara. My best friend since first year at McMaster. The girl who drove 4 hours through a snowstorm to bring me soup when I had pneumonia. The girl who told me Dominic was no good and I didn't listen. Volkov shook his head before I even spoke. It's a trap. They want to draw you out. I know it's a trap. But Sarah is in that warehouse because of me. She didn't ask for any of this. I was already pulling on my jacket. Get me on a plane to Toronto, now, and have every person you can mobilize ready to move on Cherry Street the second I walk in. Ms. O. Blackwell, your mother would never... My mother isn't here. She's in Singapore closing a deal. I'm making this call. I looked at him. Sergey, please. He studied my face. Whatever he saw there made him stop arguing. 30 minutes later, I was on a Blackwell Holdings private jet crossing the Atlantic. We landed at Billy Bishop at 10 p.m. A team of Volkov's people was already in position around the Cherry Street warehouse, an old industrial building near the Portlands, abandoned since some condo developer went bankrupt. I changed into dark tactical clothing in the SUV. I checked the small pistol I'd trained with for the past month, the weight of it familiar now in my hands. I tucked a microtransmitter into my collar button, Blackwell Tech, untraceable and invisible to a pat-down. The night air off Lake Ontario was cold and smelled like rain. I drove to the warehouse alone and parked in front of the loading bay. 2 men pulled me out of the car and searched me. They found nothing. They pushed me inside. The warehouse was huge and mostly empty. Rusted catwalks above, broken windows letting in the glow of the city. In the center, under a single hanging light, Zara was tied to a metal chair. Her face was streaked with tears, and when she saw me, she shook her head desperately, trying to scream through the tape on her mouth. Beside her stood a man in his late 50s with silver hair and a cashmere overcoat. He was turning a heavy gold ring on his finger over and over, a nervous habit disguised as casual menace. Brennan Ashcroft. I'd studied his face in a dozen intelligence files, but in person he was smaller than I expected, shorter than me, eyes like wet slate, the Blackwell princess. He spread his arms. You actually came alone. Your mother would never have been this stupid. I ignored him and looked at Zara. I'm going to get you out of here. Brennan laughed. You're not getting anyone anywhere. Your leverage. When your mother finds out I have her precious daughter, she'll give me everything. The mining contracts, the shipping routes, all of it. Or I take you apart piece by piece and mail her the evidence. His men, 8 of them, surrounded me. I could feel the guns even if I couldn't see all of them. My mother already knows I'm here, I said calmly. She knows exactly where I am and who you are. You have about 4 minutes before this building is surrounded. Brennan's smile didn't waver, but his hand stopped turning the ring. Bluffing. Just like your mother. She never bluffs. You should know that by now. I moved fast. The hours of JTF2 training took over like muscle memory. I ducked sideways, drove my elbow into the ribs of the man on my right, stripped the moment of surprise to break free from the one on my left, and pulled my pistol from the concealed holster at the small of my back. In 2 seconds, the muzzle was pressed against Brennan Ashcroft's temple. Nobody moves. His men froze, weapons half raised, terrified of hitting their boss. You little... Brennan's composure cracked. Up close, I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You release my friend. You let us walk out, and then you deal with what's coming. What's coming? As if on cue, the warehouse doors exploded inward. Armored vehicles, tactical lights flooding the space, Volkov's voice booming through a megaphone. You are surrounded. Drop your weapons. This is your only warning. Brennan's men crumbled in seconds. They were hired muscle, not soldiers, and they weren't prepared to die for a rich man's grudge. One by one, they dropped their guns and put their hands up. I kept my pistol against Brennan's head and walked him forward while one of Volkov's men untied Zara. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing. I've got you, I said. It's over. Volkov entered the warehouse and surveyed the scene with an expression that was equal parts relief and admiration. Ms. Mize, Blackwell, your mother is going to be furious that you did this without her. She'll get over it. I looked at Brennan, now pinned to the ground by two of Volkov's men. His face was pressed against the dirty concrete, and the arrogance had drained out of him like water from a cracked glass. My mother gave you 15 years to walk away, I told him. You chose this instead. That's on you. He cursed and spat, but I'd already turned my back on him. He didn't deserve another second of my attention. I drove Zara home myself. She sat in the passenger seat, clutching my hand, trembling. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. Harper, what just happened? Who are you? I told her the truth. All of it. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she stared at me for a long time. So the whole time I knew you, your mom was secretly running some kind of empire? Yeah. And your boyfriend sold you to human traffickers in Prague? Yeah. She shook her head slowly. And here I thought you were the boring friend. I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in weeks, and it came out ragged and wet and real. My mother was waiting when I got back to the estate. She was standing at the front door, arms crossed, her face unreadable. But when I got close, I saw it, the faintest softening around her eyes, the closest thing to tenderness Vivian Blackwell allowed herself. You could have been killed, she said. But I wasn't. You went without authorization. I went because it was the right call. She looked at me for a long time. Then she put her hand on my shoulder. It was the first time she'd touched me in years. You're ready, she said. The Ashcroft Group collapsed within a week. My mother unleashed the full weight of Blackwell Holdings, their stocks gutted, their partners fleeing, their shell companies exposed one by one, and carefully leaked documents that found their way to the Globe and Mail and the RCMP simultaneously. Brennan Ashcroft and his inner circle vanished from the public eye. I didn't ask where they went. 6 months later, at the annual Blackwell Holdings board meeting in a downtown Toronto tower with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Bay Street, my mother took the stage. She looked out at the room, 200 people who controlled billions of dollars, and said, I am announcing my sole heir and the new executive vice president of Blackwell Holdings, my daughter, Harper Blackwell. I walked to the podium. Every eye in the room was on me. I thought about the girl I'd been a year ago, the girl who let a man take her passport because he smiled the right way. That girl was gone. She died in a basement in Prague, and someone stronger was born in her place. I looked at my mother in the front row. She met my eyes and gave me the smallest nod, the kind of approval she'd never given easily. I gripped the microphone. I'm not here because of my last name. I'm here because I survived what was meant to destroy me, and I came back sharper. This empire was built by a woman who never asked for permission and never waited to be rescued. I intend to honor that legacy, not by inheriting it, but by earning it. Every single day. The locket rested warm against my collarbone, the same way it had since I was 6 years old. My grandmother's locket, my mother's sigil, my proof of who I am. That man, named Dominic, is a faded ghost in a corner of my memory now. Nothing but a stepping stone on the path that brought me here, standing at the front of the room, ready for whatever comes next, because the girl who was once sold for $500,000 turned out to be worth an entire empire.